Welcome back to our lecture on the third wave civilizations and what we call here the post-classical trade. Remember, classical represents that classic age of empire that basically ended with the fall of the Romans in the 400s. So post-classical would be post-Roman or third wave civilizations, and this is the second part now of our lecture, where we will consider the overland exchange routes of Eurasia and the Americas, starting here with the famous Silk Roads. And you can see from the map that the Silk Roads, not a single road, nothing like that, a series of interconnected trails and open spaces that stitch together in different places and in different ways various trading towns and communities stretching from China in the east all the way to the Mediterranean in the west, from cities like Luoyang and Chang'an to Dunhuang, Kashgar, Bukhara. Some of these you've identified on your maps, to the familiar Middle Eastern, what we call Middle Eastern towns of Antioch and even Palmyra, Syria here, a city that has undergone great hardships in the recent war in Syria. Taken together, these mixed routes and connecting paths form what we collectively know as the Silk Roads or Silk Road. That name was not itself coined until much more recently in history, but we use it retroactively to apply to the third wave now of civilization and the overland trade routes that will emerge. Some of them quite old, that is, stretching back into antiquity, but gaining new life now in the post-classical or third wave era of civilization. Just as the maritime trades did, overland trade promoted travel and cultural exchange, and the revival of the ancient Silk Road trade in the post-classical period now will restore to great prominence those towns along the route, promoting exchange between East and West, between cultures and religions, clothing and food and languages, and a remarkable sort of cultural synthesis, you might say, of people in this age of travel now, where encountering the foreign becomes almost commonplace. Here you see two men sitting at a meal together, sharing what looks like a good repast, ample foods and delicacies and drinks that cemented and encouraged that blending of East and West. Certainly encouraging the rise of what we call emporia, that is, trading towns. The Silk Road's trade was a relay trade governed by no single power, king, or state. Instead, a series of trading towns across Inner Asia served as manufacturing and relay points for goods traded across the length of Eurasia. Towns like Samarkand, Bukhara, Merv, and Dunhuang formed the nuclei of this great trading network. As Shan Shuang, the Chinese traveler who you're studying in the historical document assignment on travel, as Shan Shuang recalled, the precious merchandise of many foreign countries is stored up in the town we know as Samarkand. And here you see today the central square of Samarkand in modern-day Uzbekistan shows the Islamic influence. One of the oldest continually occupied cities in the world, it was founded by the Persians in the 600s BCE. Chinese emperors coveted control over what they considered their Western trade because it supported a long-distance trade across Asia, a lucrative trade that connected all the way to the Roman Empire when the Roman Empire was still extant, but will connect in the post-Roman age now to those successor states that take its place. During the 300s CE, merchants built a cemetery along the trade route near the desert oasis city of Kucha. And this has been recently excavated. The far western frontier of China at the time revealed both financial and artistic resources. The religious figures inlaid in brick are pre-Buddhist and depict traditional celestial animals of Chinese folk religion. So this is Western China before the arrival of Buddhism, where folk religions and their various symbols are now depicted in the early Western, Chinese Western Silk Road's trade town of Kucha. Religion often accompanied trade, as we've seen, including religions such as Christianity, Zoroastrianism, Manichaeism, Islam, and certainly in China, Buddhism. Several branches of the Silk Roads joined together in Dunhuang, a trading town in western China. It sat on the edge of a desert and joined both east and west, along with north and south trading routes. A crossroads town was Dunhuang, which became a major center for Buddhist study and culture. So location, location, location. You can see today how the very edge of a desert, a forbidding desert, is the peripheral part now of the Dunhuang trading community. That is, its periphery touches that of the deserts. And far from being an isolated or empty location, Dunhuang supported thriving populations of traders and artists and religious folk who left behind murals and paintings and sculptures which line the walls of the nearly 500 cave temples that surround Dunhuang. Being in a desert climate, it was too hot to spend much time outside, and so its residents found interior spaces in the form of caves that offered cooler temperatures, you might say. Buddhism took hold in these caves in northern China by the 300s, evidenced by the cave murals and the artistic works which depict the process of conversion and acculturation. Dunhuang, 1,000 years of commerce, worship, and Buddhist art in a post-classical, beginning in the post-classical age, you might say, that is beginning in the classical age itself, but continuing on for centuries. What is this man looking at? Why, a ginormous reclining Buddha. A 50-foot long Buddha from the Middle Tang period in the 700s to the 800s reclines to await death before serenely passing into nirvana. And so the Buddha is sometimes depicted in recline, serene, transcendent, ready for death, ready to escape the cycles of despair and desire that the mortal life afforded. So not a sad scene, but one of great serenity. And in this case, created by masons and sculptors in one of the many caves that surround Dunhuang. A remarkable, remarkable work. Buddhists began digging the caves into the cliffs south of Dunhuang in the 300s and decorated them with wall murals and statues, starting a tradition that lasted until the 1300s. Dunhuang became a pilgrimage site for Buddhists across Asia. And here you see a cave mural depicting the city as a resting place for weary travelers and religious pilgrims alike, while on the right here, a seated Buddha surrounded by modern scaffolding, part of a preservation and restoration project ongoing at the Dunhuang Cave. So the scaffolding has been put there by modern workmen and restorers to take care of and maintain and restore the great works of art, the priceless treasures of the Dunhuang Caves. And here you see Buddha looking still somewhat Indian, but also discernibly Chinese. That is, his gown, his cloaks are becoming rather more Chinese, and even some of his facial features, but his body type and style still retain the rather thin and even aquiline features of the Indian Buddha. The Buddhist caves were already 300 years old when a famous Chinese traveler visited them. That, of course, is Xuanzang, a Chinese Buddhist monk of the early 600s who made a 16-year pilgrimage to India via Central Asia in order to collect ancient Sanskrit Buddhist manuscripts. By studying and translating them, Xuanzang hoped to purify Buddhist practice in China and bring a more uniform practice to the many sects of Chinese Buddhism. Recognizing a dozen different languages inscribed on the thousands of scrolls that comprise the Buddhist archives of Dunhuang, including Sanskrit, Turkic, Tibetan, and even Judeo-Persian. And you can see from his comment here, Xuanzang attesting to the crossroads connection now between India, Central Asia, and China in the piecing together, if you will, of the Buddhist story. Taking a scholar's interest, he said, it is indispensable to have the right names in order that there be no mistakes. Dunhuang reached a height during China's Tang Dynasty between the 600s and early 900s CE. You can see yet another map showing the connection between the central and western parts of China and the Silk Road's trades heading west. Wealth and power in China during the Tang Dynasty, yeah, prosperity, you bet, included its western trade. Xi'an, the city of Xi'an, or Chang'an as it's sometimes known, was the capital city, situated west of the other traditional capital cities in China, like Nanjing and Beijing. The word itself, Shan, means western peace. By the mid-700s, its population approached nearly 1 million inhabitants. 1 million. The Dunhuang Cave Buddha, which you see here on the right, is depicted with a Chinese military guard, a fierce-looking character, suggesting that the Tang Emperor wished to be seen as a patron and protector of Buddhism. Dunhuang culture mirrored a crossroads of international influences. To the left here you see floral garments worn by those 6th century statues reflecting a Persian influence. Remember, Persia was 2,500 miles to the west of Dunhuang, while the women below wear discernibly Chinese silk garments as they are presented as brides to rulers of the kingdoms of the West. So through marriage, through trade, through diplomacy, the cultures of West and East combining now, connecting, merging, blending in a place like Dunhuang. The figure you're looking at here in the corner, the left corner, is a bodhisattva, which in Buddhist tradition is the great saintly figure who delays his own transcendence into nirvana by helping others of his earthly brethren and travelers find their way to nirvana. So the bodhisattva, a revered figure in Buddhism, he's shown here as both Chinese and dark complected, like the peoples of southern India. So again, a kind of ethnic blending in the artistic depictions. In Dunhuang and elsewhere, the Silk Road commerce in fashions and fabrics combined most famously in the Silk Road trade as a silk trade, that is actual silk. Silkworms that produce a single long filament used in the construction of their cocoon. As a thread, this filament has lustrous and smooth and yet tough qualities. In many cultures of Eurasia, silk came to be associated with status, wealth, and religious display. Silk production began in China as far back as 4800 BCE, longer ago than the pyramids, by 1,000 years, by 2,000 years. Chinese traders began to carry it out in China during the Han Dynasty in 100 BCE. So an ancient art of silk weaving will become now mixed up with the trade of the post-classical age. In addition to silk, many other commodities form the cultural and material exchanges across Asia. Yeah, it's easy to see why silk was coveted for the soft, smooth textiles that could be made. But so too was Chinese tea and ceramics, which headed west to Persia and the Mediterranean. For example, while gold, gems, and horses moved east into China. And I love this wall mural here because you can see not only the diversity of peoples from rather light skin to darker skin to quite dark, representing the kind of cultural map of ethnicity across Asia. You see the trade, the great ceramics from China and bronzes from China being hauled across in wagons pulled by beasts of burden in some cases, or pushed by travelers themselves as handcarts. This represents a dazzling array of ethnic types, of trade goods, of textiles, of clothes. Once again, it seems clothing made the man or the woman, as the case may be. Strayer provides us with another snapshot view of some of these trade goods. In China, as we know, silk, but also bamboo and mirror and gunpowder, paper. Mentioned that paper was invented in China. In other places, India, cottons and herbals, precious stones and spices. The Middle East, dates and nuts and almonds, and a whole array of wonderful food items. While in the Mediterranean basin, glassware, glazes, jewelry, wool, and linen textiles from Europe. So all the world shopped, you might say, or so it seemed, along the post-classical Silk Road trades of Eurasia. The advent of globalization during the post-classical period also included the transfer, unfortunately, of epidemic diseases, most famously the bubonic plague of the 13th and 14th centuries. Echoed in the modern-day spread of diseases, as the headlines of the newspaper suggest. Wherever people mix and mingle from different places, they mix and mingle more than their trade goods and their languages and their religions. The biological passengers, you might say, also mix and mingle, and thus the spread of great diseases, wreaking havoc, of course, upon the populations. In time, those diseases would spread to the Western Hemisphere, that is, following Columbus's famous voyage of 1492. But prior to that time, prior to the arrival of Columbus, and what historians call the pre-Columbian era of American civilization, we see many of the same patterns emerging, including patterns of trade and commerce and cultural exchange. 500 years before Columbus, Native Americans traded precious stones across the American Southwest and Mexico. None more precious than turquoise. Turquoise is a greenish-blue stone colored by copper salts, found in many desert regions of the world, including the American Southwest, along the Silk Road trades of Europe as well. It was treated most often as a precious gem in the civilizations of pre-Columbian America, Persia, China, Egypt, and India. Here you see a map showing the Four Corners region of the American Southwest, heading southward into China. The turquoise roads are sort of the Native American equivalent to the Silk Roads and trade of Eurasia. Mining and manufacturing of these precious gems by native people from gem-rich sites like Cerrillos near modern-day Santa Fe, New Mexico. The Cerrillos mine extended some 200 feet underground, and native miners used fire to separate the turquoise from surrounding rock, and then stone hammers and antlers as picks to pry the stone. Remember, the native artisans had no metal, had no bronze, had no iron, and so they had to use rock tools and bone tools and antler tools. So a remarkable accomplishment, a 200-foot deep underground mine. These stones were polished and worked by gem artisans above ground into a smooth and colorful finish. Stones that were valued for their beauty as well as amulets for protection in the healing arts and the folk religions of the day. They formed the basis of pre-Columbian trading economy in America. Again, you see the Four Corners region along with Nevada, from which much of the turquoise was mined. Turquoise is still mined in Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado. And so you see this economic grouping here in the map of North America, as it will combine with the trades of central Mexico, and from there along the Gulf of Mexico to the Mississippi Basin and the Mississippian civilizations, connecting in a kind of great continental triangle here of trade that will go on for centuries before the arrival of European people. 1,200 years ago, it was the basis of a trading civilization that stretched from the Four Corners region southward over the Sierra Madre Mountains to the merchant towns of Central America and via the Gulf of Mexico and the via the Gulf of Mexico to the Mississippian sites and via the Colorado River to California. The arid Southwest, a land of relatively little rain, was the center of the turquoise trade. And in the great mesas and bluffs of this desert region, areas like Chaco Canyon in northern New Mexico, rich in precious stones like turquoise and its cousin argillite, which was orange, brilliant orange. A network of political and trade connections across an area covering some 57,000 square miles. And a civilization that historians sometimes call Anasazi, but which more recently has been converted to simply the ancestral Pueblo people. But whether we call them the Anasazi or the ancestral Pueblo, these are the pre-Columbian native people who built the great turquoise trading civilization. Here you see a picture of Pueblo Bonito, as the Spanish called it. Pretty town, the largest of the Anasazi towns, located in Chaco Canyon in northern New Mexico, as it looked at its height around 1000 CE. 500 years before Columbus. Turquoise functioned like money and served as trade currency as well for the Southwest people that we call the Anasazi or ancestral Pueblo people. A geography of trade and settlement. You see superimposed over the modern American map the trade routes of the Anasazi. Patches of dense settlements and markets connected by rivers and systems of roads that were sometimes 12 yards wide and made flat by their engineers. And everywhere you see here a symbol, whether a square or a triangle, you see a so-called great house settlement. That is a place where the ancestral peoples created clustered communities that could serve as trading posts, as ceremonial sites, or even as lived communities. And their ruins are visible today across the desert Southwest. You want to take a fun road trip, get in your car and drive due east through Nevada and Utah to the Four Corners region. You will be in the heartland of this ancient trading civilization that predated Columbus and the arrival of Europeans by centuries. Architects of stone and builders of towns. Here you see Mesa Verde, a national park now on the high towering mesa of southern Colorado. Mesa Verde, carved into the very cliff itself. The famous sites of the Anasazi and the ancestral Pueblo people. Cliff Palace, as this one is known. These carved sandstone dwellings, sometimes as tall as 5 stories, covering 3 acres in the great cliffs of the mesa, the canyon lands of the mesa. Here you see up close. These were not so much regular residential homes as rather special ceremonial and religious sites where teams of spiritual shaman, priest figures, and their attendants could live and worship and carry out the sacred rituals of the people, all the while carrying on the day-to-day necessities of sustaining life in such an incredible environment. These pueblos were built into the cliffs of Mesa Verde Canyon in southern Colorado somewhere in the period of the 1100s to 1200s. So 3 centuries before the arrival of Columbus. The engineering and architectural feats are astonishing, as is the geometry of urban settlement. The D-shaped perimeter of Anasazi and ancestral Pueblo towns, featuring squares and rectangles and circular walled enclosures constructed of stone and masonry. These were planned. This took mathematical and engineering prowess to plan these settlements. Circular pit rooms called kivas, often sunken into the earth and entered through an opening in the roof via ladder, are a common feature of the Anasazi and ancestral Pueblo sites. They were used for both domestic and ceremonial life. And they mixed with the great agricultural traditions, especially of maize, the food crop of choice, along with squash and sunflower and beans grown from soils watered by rainfall and runoff, as well as by river water delivered by irrigation. Some of the pottery still survives, the ornate, elaborate, patterned ceramic pottery, again attesting to not only the aesthetic preferences but the artistic capacity of the ancestral Pueblo peoples. Just one of several regional trade networks in pre-Columbian America, connecting together the Yucatan of Mexico and Central America with the Mississippian trade towns along the Mississippi River and its tributary. Thatched roof, daub, and wattle houses, which you see below, were common to the river trading communities of the Mississippi. Shells from the Gulf, deer skins from eastern woodlands, bison pelts from the west, and horn from the prairies were among the items traded in the Mississippi markets. Located on the central Mississippi coast was Cahokia, which we've seen before in the Age of Empire lecture. Located near modern St. Louis, Cahokia was the largest trading complex north of the Rio Grande River and was the largest city in North America until Philadelphia surpassed it in the 1800s. At its height, around 1200 CE, Cahokia's population of 10,000 people was fed by food crops, including a variety of maize originally imported from Mexico. Astonishing monumental architecture, the earthen pyramid platforms of Cahokia. The tallest, which reaches over 100 feet in height, and the largest with a base covering some 13 acres. Baskets of dirt, one after the other, countless thousands of man-hours of labor, all in adoration of the civilization that they had created. Thank you. That'll be the end now of part 2, completing the post-classical trade lecture.